So obviously here we are 25 years later. We can easily say, oh, it was always going to be that way, but JavaScript hasn't exactly always had it easy, has it? I don't think. I mean, apart from those early days where it was very popular, Netscape, of course, disappeared. And then JavaScript became the ECMAScript standard, which is a little complicated for some people to get. I get that, but it's a standard upon which JavaScript is based, and I know you've worked on that. It seems to me that JavaScript almost went out of fashion until the arrival of what we in the early mid 2000s called Web 2.0, when web programming suddenly took off again, acquired kind of turbo thrusters, didn't it? And of course, Microsoft was kind of cool towards it as well, wasn't it?
That's right. So, so first of all, you should mention that JavaScript was literally designed and built in 10 days. So it was at least the first version, the prototype of it, and so it was quite simple and imperfect. There were mistakes made in that early design, some of which have been fixed over time, and others can't be fixed because you have to preserve that original web content that was built, with those mistakes. But so it was imperfect, and many programmers looked down upon it, let's say in the late 90s, in that period of time. Java was still being promoted as the web language for serious programmers and stuff. But as things progressed in the early 2000s into, as you say, into the Web 2.0 period, Java really didn't integrate very well with HTML, and so it really wasn't a very good choice for building richer, more interactive websites. So when people wanted to do more complex things on the web, early examples of things were like early Google Maps and Gmail and other email programs like that. People discovered that, in fact, JavaScript. See, the name here is really a confusing thing about the language. So for many people, and even I slip up sometimes. But they discovered that JavaScript was powerful enough to enable them to do what they needed to do to build these richer Web 2.0 style applications. And that's really when it started to take off, and which ultimately led to the need to improve the standards, to make the language more powerful by adding newer features, while maintaining the early simplicity and compatibility and stuff. But so it was kind of, JavaScript became kind of the latent superpower that was there in the web technology stack that for a number of years people just ignored and made fun of until they realized that it was actually something very powerful and useful.
It's interesting. It took 10 days to develop Java, and of course you've worked on
JavaScript.
JavaScript, and which I know we've spoken to other people who've created language. It took months and years to create these languages. Any sense of why it was 10 days? Why it was so quick? Or what it was about it, inherent about why Brendan was able to get it done so quickly?
He had to, or it wouldn't have been included in Netscape, because really the big train that was moving down the track at that time was to incorporate Java into the browser. And if it had been firmly determined that Java was going to be part of the next Netscape release. There was a lot of questions at Netscape, and that was, the beta of that release was like 3 months away. Mm-hmm. So this occurred in May of 1995. The beta release was in September of 1995. So, and Java was announced to the world at the end of May. So in early May, there was a lot of skepticism within Netscape about whether they could build a language, a simpler language, the language that became JavaScript. Mm. And so Brendan essentially had to demonstrate before the Java announcement at the end of May that he could design and implement this language well enough that it could make it into the beta release in September. And so that was why this all happened so fast
Hmm.
and was so rushed. There was this kind of horse race with Java. So that Netscape 2, which was the major release they were doing, so that it would be able to ship with both Java and JavaScript.
Hmm.
Otherwise, it would have been just Java.
How much more complicated, denser, richer has it changed since those early days?
So okay, so the first ECMAScript specification, ECMAScript is the standard that describes JavaScript, which was written in 1997, essentially describes the version of JavaScript that Brendan did in those 10 days. And it's about a 100-page document. This is the ECMAScript 5 specification that was done in 2009. So that was a bit over 10 years later. It's 240 pages, so it doubled in size.
Yeah.
This is the ECMAScript 2015 specification.
Right.
Here, it's 543 pages. So basically, in terms of the specification, it went from over its first 20 years, went from a 100-page document to a 550-page document.
Right.
Now, so that's just a sense of the growth.
Is it? I've seen this happen with Java. Bloat. I mean, there's obviously a huge pressure to stop it getting bloated, isn't there? And also on one hand, also to not introduce changes that are going to break it. What's the sense of responsibility now when the committees get together and develop this standard?
Well, it's kind of the unofficial model of the JavaScript Standards Committee. The ECMAScript Committee is don't break the web.
Yeah.
So as a general principle, that Standards Committee tries to avoid anything that will break any existing code. Right. Sometimes even things that were bugs, but those bugs can't be fixed because there's existing code that depends upon them. So that's a very, very, very strong ethic within the Standards Committee. On the web, we're talking about stuff that's literally sitting out there on a server for 20 or 25 years and nobody is doing any maintenance of, and it has to run on whatever the current modern browser is. You have to respect that old code and make sure it's going to keep working.
So come back to the beginning. We opened with your quote talking about its importance on the web. You also said that it's unlikely to be the world's best programming language, and yet here it is. It's still, so you don't have to be best to be number one, I guess. Where would you say it could be improved, and what's its future?
JavaScript has become so popular, so widely used. Everybody has an idea of what they might like to add to it. And there has been an awfully lot, as you saw from the size of the spec, that has been added to it over the years. But it's difficult in a programming language. One of the things a language designer has to do, who's responsible for a widely used language, is try to maintain some coherence in terms of how the user perceives the language and how they understand it and stuff. And so there's many, many things that could be added to a language. As some language designer, and I don't know who to attribute this to right now, said it's much more, the most important job of a language designer is deciding what to leave out rather than what to put in. So there's lots of people who want to add things, have their pet features, and that's something the Standards Committee has to deal with, because the JavaScript Standards Committee has grown to a quite large body with lots of different people. And so that's one of the things we're going to have to see over the next 10 years is how that evolves and whether that kind of coherence of design can be maintained as a large body of people now come up with some influence of what's going to happen. One of the big areas of there's a couple areas of controversy right now, or potential controversy. One of which, like I said, JavaScript was designed during the heyday of object-oriented programming, and today, functional programming is very popular, and people who are functional programming enthusiasts don't really like object-oriented programming languages all that much for various reasons and stuff. And so there's a lot of pressure to add more functional style programming features to JavaScript. And some people would even like to de-emphasize object-oriented features of JavaScript. And those are the people we have to remind, don't break the web,
yeah.
that you can't take that stuff out. But definitely that has been a trend to add more and more functional style programming features to the language.
Yeah.
And so that now kind of gives you sort of a two-headed language where you have a set of features that are good for object-oriented programming and a set of features that are good for functional programming, which increases the overall complexity. The other ongoing controversy is the role of typing, in particular static typing in the language. JavaScript, from its very beginning, was a dynamically typed language. There was a lot of floundering around in the 2000s within the JavaScript standards community to try to see if they could make it be more statically typed, and that didn't work out. But there's still a lot of interest in static typing, and what static typing really says, it's a way to identify some errors earlier in the process, right? And so very popular today is a dialect of JavaScript called TypeScript, which was developed at Microsoft. One of the big questions is whether that sort of static type analysis will remain really a tool in the tool chain, something that happens during the development process and is used more by professional programmers, or whether it will actually be integrated and become part of the core language or not.
Right. Good. Well, that's about what's got time for, Alan. Listen, it's been great talking to you. Thanks for joining me today. It's been really great talking to you.
Sure.